this. Once again, welcome to Moving Forward with Young Voices. Happy to welcome back to our program Brayden Myers. Brayden, I know there are some folks who are meeting you for the very first time. Take a moment, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Hi, first of all, always a pleasure to be here. I enjoy coming back week after week after week. My name is Brayden Myers. I'm an economics, history, and philosophy student at the University of Alabama. I've done a lot of work in tax policy, and I've written a lot recently on democracy and governance, which is what I think we're going to be talking about here today. So super excited to get into that.
Yeah, I'm looking at this article that you've written for, it's published in National Review, Democracy's Machine Learning Problem. And look, I'll admit, I don't know exactly how to take AI. I'm starting to use it, and in some ways I'm like, hey, this is great. Look at the solutions that it's providing. But there are some challenges that come along with this. And let's dive into some of those challenges and see what do we need to be aware of the further we tread into artificial intelligence.
It's absolutely worth keeping an eye on. I also utilize all the time, and it's an incredibly powerful tool. It's an incredibly useful thing. But what I wrote about was an article the New York Times recently wrote about a man named Alan Brooks, right? Now, Alan Brooks was a father, had gone through a divorce and used ChatGPT fairly regularly. But at one point, his son asked him about pi, 3.14. I never memorized all the digits, but that number, and he asked ChatGPT about it and answered his son's question, which was great and all, but he had a couple of questions of his own. So he dug into ChatGPT. And in doing so, in his observations about pi, ChatGPT convinced him he had created an entirely new design of mathematics. And that is because ChatGPT is built to please. It is built based on our preferences and what we send into it.
I could see that being very dangerous, especially if you need real scientific answers, but it's feeding you, I guess we could call this safely pseudoscience, or I don't know if it even counts as that. Did he ever figure out, did Alan Brooks figure out that the AI wasn't being completely straight with him and telling him what he wanted to hear?
He did eventually, after multiple weeks of neglecting his own health and mental health. He also emailed multiple government agencies, convinced about the risk that this new mathematics would pose to him, isolated himself from friends and the people around him, and invested a huge number of resources into a concept that AI was basically bolstering.
I'm curious, when AI starts leading us on, it doesn't know it's leading us on, does it?
No, absolutely not. But AI is trained based off of user approval. Those of us who have used chat boxes are very familiar with the screen that says, please select which of these responses you prefer, right? And you give your little thumbs up and you go on your way with whichever question that you're probably more concerned about getting answered. But what those thumbs up are doing are feeding the AI over and over again that responses that people like, which in most cases are responses that praise them and tell them they have a good idea, because those are the things that people like. And those responses are the ones that keep getting those thumbs up. And we have a feeding cycle where there are more and more positive responses over and over again. And I've noticed recently, and through a lot of history, but especially recently, we've also seen this trend emerging in our democracy.
I like how you put this in your article, that over time, that type of response where which response do you like best, creates a sycophantic system, and
yes.
Basically you're creating an artificial yes man to make you feel good.
Absolutely, yes, and we see that yes man again in politics and in AI. I mean, over and over again, our parties shift their values. Politicians will move their values to affirm what the consensus are, what people want to hear. And a lot of times what people want to hear is, you have been wronged and it's someone else's fault. And I know how I can fix that, and that is by blaming someone else. That is very often the response. But it also gives us a series of promises that just frankly can't be kept. Because again, when you tell people that you can give them more good things than you actually can, they're going to like that response and they're going to keep feeding the machine, whether that's an AI or an American democracy.
That is such a great observation. And I had never thought of it that way, but yeah, it's making easy promises of things that you really have no intention of delivering on. But at the moment, it's going to get me excited and hyped up, and I'm going to probably go along with it. Let me ask you this. Has anybody worked on a version of AI that actually plays the role of a true friend? In other words, it's willing to tell us things that we may not want to hear?
That's not to my knowledge. I'll tell you, I'm not an AI expert. I've worked a little bit in AI training and all that sort of thing, but it's not a topic I have a ton of experience in. What the New York Times did find in their exploration is that virtually every major chat box they tested, whether it's Claude or Gemini or ChatGPT, come to very similar results when you feed them the same string of prompts that were fed in the case of Alan Brooks, right? So over and over again, what we are seeing is it's not just ChatGPT's problem. It is the machine learning problem and how we are training these things and a lack of guardrails. And what we've seen since stories like Brooks and many others is that a lot of these AI companies are taking steps to introduce new guardrails and create new blocks to stop their AI from going off the rails.
Interesting. I mean, you point out in here, it wasn't a matter of Alan Brooks was out there seeking validation no matter what. You say he repeatedly questioned his own judgments. He asked, for reality checks, but he didn't get them.
Yes. No, not at all. Actually, it pushed entirely against his request for reality checks, which is even more ridiculous, but also a predictable side effect of training systems on what people want to hear, right? He asked, hey, do you think this is crazy? He went to different chats, which is a whole different issue with AI training and whatnot. He would jump around and he would say, hey, let's go back down to earth. You're telling me that I have predates technology that could allow me to legitimately speak to animals, generate force fields, and crack every single encryption created by any type of security firm, right? He's like, there's no way this is real. And he was right. His intuition was right. But AI told him, nope, you have discovered something groundbreaking and truly unique here, and you are in the right.
Oh, that I can see where that would be dangerous. I mean, who doesn't like, a little stroke to their ego, their genius? And the sad thing here, at least for Brooks, is it sounds like he probably landed himself on the radar screen of a number of governments, that he reached out to in an effort to protect them. And they're like, who is this nutcase?
Yes. What I heard is that only one agency actually responded to him asking for proof of these things. But absolutely, I mean, he used a professional LinkedIn account, all that sort of thing, to contact these agencies and spread his misled information because he was just being fed over and over again by these AI.
So let's talk about some of the safeguards, both for AI as well as for democracy, in terms of, when politicians are telling us things we want to hear. Seems like when election season rolls around, they become about as adept as AI at telling us what we want to hear.
Yes, and I mean that's a byproduct of the evolution of politicians, right? The ones who are good at telling people what they like win elections, and the ones that aren't good at telling people what they like don't win elections, right? We see this repeated over and over again. And every, I'll say November for the presidential election, obviously all kinds of local elections and that sort of thing. But every November, we have the option to check our little yes, thumbs up or thumbs down box based off of the messages that politicians are giving us. The issue we run into with this, and of course, I would never denounce democracy, just like I would never denounce AI. I think both are great systems that can positively shape the world, but we need to be careful and be aware that the promises that both politicians and artificial intelligence are making are not always what they seem.
I love the last line you have here. We can build systems to praise us, or we can choose systems that tell us the truth. One of them is going to feel good, but the other one is actually much better for us in the long run. Again, we were talking with Brayden Myers. Brayden, for people who want to follow you and your work, where's the best place to find you, either online or on social media?
Yeah, so on the Young Voices website, I have a page that features all of my recent articles and appearances. So that's a great place to find those. I also put them on my LinkedIn, so if someone would like to connect with me, it's just my name, Brayden Myers, and I'd love to see you out there.
Great to visit with you. Looking forward to our next chat.
Yeah, thank you again for having me.
And we are back on Moving Forward with Young Voices. We are joined by a new contributor. Her name is Chloe Sparwath. She's an Atlanta native and also a graduate of the University of Virginia. And Chloe, would you take just a moment to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes. Hi, it is awesome to be here. My name is Chloe. Like you said, I'm currently a little bit north of Atlanta. I moved back here after graduating from the University of Virginia about 3 years ago. I work in the nonprofit space, and I've been really involved in the conservative slash Israel space for basically since the beginning of college. So that's been my world for a while now.
Boy, speaking of that Israel space, you know, there has been a lot of shift and quite a bit of discord on American college campuses, especially since the October 7th attacks it'll be 3 years this year, right?
Yes, it will.
And I have to admit, while I have followed some of those demonstrations and some of what I would consider, the outright unrest that has been sown by some organizations, I had never heard of unity of fields before I got a glimpse of the article that you have published in Real Clear World. For those like me who are not familiar with this organization, Unity of Fields, tell me a little bit about who they are and where did they originate?
Yes. Okay. First, I got to correct myself. October will actually mark the 2 year anniversary
Okay,
since
thank
October
you.
7th, 2023. I just realized. But yeah, so Unity of Fields, it's actually, it's an organization that a lot of people also haven't heard of. It's relatively new. It's an offshoot of the United Kingdom organization, Palestine Action. So that's kind of their parent organization. And then they came to the United States and they called themselves Palestine Action at first, but they've switched to call themselves the Unity of Fields, which is supposed to kind of refer to the different fields, you could say, that are involved in the militant Israel work. So, like, Hamas, Houthis, different organizations like that. So it's it is a specific organization, but it's also kind of an umbrella term that refers to the different fields that go into it. They are hard to track down. It's a little bit difficult because the funding is kind of muggy. They're mainly funded by one of the Cox heirs, Fergie Chambers. He has a lot of money and he considers himself a professional revolutionary. So he pours all of his money into this organization. But basically, they take to social media, Telegram, you name it, to promote acts of violence and intimidation and property destruction against, for the most part, pro-Israel people organizations, although they have done some damage to the outside of synagogues and the homes of Jewish people and Jewish business owners as well. So,
I was
yeah.
going to ask you, so what exactly is their goal? But I kind of have a sense of what their goal may be. And it sounds like it's really sowing seeds of unrest. I know you mentioned in your article, it's enough. It's questionable enough that actually the UK designated them a terrorist organization. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yes, so the UK did recently do that, and in the article that I recently wrote, that's one of the main things that I'm kind of arguing is that we need to follow suit and also declare them a terrorist organization. It'd be a little fuzzy because they're not necessarily a foreign terrorist organization, though they are right now being investigated in the UK for ties to Iran. Like I said, some of the funding is a little sketchy. So they would be more, since they are a US based organization now, more of a domestic terrorist organization. But yeah, so in the UK now, if you associate with them, promote them, you are considered aiding and abetting a terrorist organization. So it's a crime. And I do think it's necessary to do the same thing here. This isn't just some wild, anti-American, crazy group that says different things that people disagree with. Like one of their main goals is they openly state that they're a militant organization. They were actually, the US government did, we took them down from Instagram because their Instagram that had, I think, around 70,000 followers was openly stating that their goal that they were working towards was dismantling the United States as a country. And you'll see, when you see the protests and whatnot at Columbia University and some of the police protests that were going on in LA that turned more into riots where people were getting injured. And like I mentioned again in the article, there was a janitor at Columbia who students held hostage and were calling a Jew lover, and he got pretty banged up. Unity of Fields was active in promoting those people. They put out toolkits for taking over classrooms. They post guides on how to create your own weapons. So they are literally physically, materially aiding and abetting acts of terror and destruction in the United States. And I think for the United Kingdom, it was a lot of things, but one of the breaking points for them, where they officially declared them a terrorist organization was when Unity of Fields members broke into a military base in the UK. Here, they have broken into some weapons manufacturing sites, stuff like that. So I think the time where they're actually could do something big, where lots of people are going to get hurt and American interests are going to be actually compromised, is coming if it's not here already.
As you're describing all the different actions that they've taken, I want to give people the benefit of the doubt, but this does not sound at all like a bunch of starry-eyed kids being misled, by an ideologue. I mean, this sounds like people who are very serious about, I'll just say it, revolutionary activity, and that's a dangerous place to go. So what are American officials doing in response to this? Or are we hearing anything? I honestly, your article is the first I really had heard of Unity of Fields. Are they being watched closely by, U.S. authorities and intelligence agencies and so forth?
Yeah, so when I was preparing for this article, I actually really came across the issues around this organization specifically from another Young Voices contributor, Aaron Pomerantz. I think you've had him on before, him writing about this. But besides that, there's really not that much out there. It was a big deal in the UK when Palestine Action was banned. And there were a lot of people saying, oh, it's a freedom of speech issue, which, again, once you're physically taking actions that are violent, hurting people, and outright stating that you're trying to overthrow or a country's government, that's past, just being hippies with free speech. But in the United States, no. If you look it up, there's really not that much. I believe Marco Rubio maybe has talked about it a little bit, but there's really not that much being done. So I think that's why it's important for people with platforms and voices to kind of start talking about it, because they are very dangerous. One of the craziest things to me, and it wasn't, unique for them, but after there was the shooting in DC that resulted in two young people being shot outside an AJC event, Unity of Fields was out there on their Telegraph channels, Telegram, and on Twitter too, saying, this is good, this is the kind of action that we need, glory to the martyrs type of thing. And so if their kind of ideal is that anyone who is associated with Israel and the United States, who they also outright say is, a terror state, colonial empire that needs to be destructed, anybody who is associated or supportive in any way is, open season on them because of their association. And that is very dangerous.
Again, we are talking with Chloe Sparwath. She is an Atlanta native, and I have to admit, my eyes have been open from this conversation, and now I'm going to be paying a lot closer attention here, Chloe. For people who wish to follow you, either on social media or just to follow your writing online, what's the best way to go about that?
Awesome. Yeah, Chloe Swan with 3 N's on Substack, Twitter, and Instagram.
Excellent. This is not an easy topic, but I really appreciate how you handle it, and I come away feeling better informed rather than simply backed into a
Good,
corner.
that's the goal.
Thanks again.
Yes, thank you so much.
Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. Happy to welcome Ted Newson back to the program. You have been a guest on here before, but for the sake of those meeting you for the first time, go ahead and take a moment to tell us just a little bit about your background.
Afternoon, Brian. So I'm Ted Newson. I'm a UK-based commentator with Young Voices. I focus on civil liberties and freedom of speech and low taxes. And today we're discussing my article in CapX about how Kemi Badenoch can be the next Javier Milei for Britain.
Boy, that's setting the bar pretty high. Milei has really done some great things for Argentina. Talk to me a little bit about Kemi, and say her last name for me again. Badenoch, is that correct?
Badenoch. That's right, yes.
I don't know much about her. So as someone who's hearing about her for the first time, how would you introduce me to who she is?
So Kemi Badenoch has been the leader of the Conservative Party for just under a year. In that time, she hasn't had the effect on the polls that the Tories were perhaps hoping for. Obviously, the 4th of July last year was our election, and the Conservative Party was roundly defeated after 14 years. Kemi Badenoch replaced our outgoing Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. And since then, instead of recovering in the polls, the Tories have sunk down to something like 16 or 17% now. So things are getting pretty dire for the Conservatives, and they need to do something bold to stand out.
What is it that is preventing the Conservatives from gaining traction? Have they made missteps in the past that they are trying to recover from, or is it the need to go in an entirely different direction?
Well, I think the Conservative Party have damaged public trust. The state was doing an awful lot when they left government. The tax burden was very high. And so in order to win back public trust, they need to cut back the size of the state. They need to cut back taxes and go back to the central pillars of conservatism to kind of win back people who are perhaps attracted to Reform UK and want to take a chance on a government with them in 2029.
So now let's bring Javier Milei into the picture here. He has cut back on taxes and cut back on the size and scope of government as well. But boy, did he ever go about it in a very bold sort of way. Are the Tories ready for that kind of bold action?
Well, the Conservatives have got to be ready, because you see Reform UK polling at 35% these days, and that is an existential threat to the Tories. If they don't change fundamentally and go back to basic principles, they can't expect to be a party 4 or 5 years down the line. So really what I'm suggesting for the Conservatives is a way out and a solution to their polling woes. Reform UK and the Conservatives are so close on issues such as immigration, culture wars. It's really on the economics that they need to stand up to reform, frame themselves as the adults in the room, and really pull back the political capital from Nigel Farage and his MPs.
So what is holding them back at this point?
So I think at the moment, Reform have had the wind. They've obviously had a very busy summer laying out their policy platform, most recently for deportations. The Overton window has been moved sufficiently so that immigration is the biggest issue in our country. And ultimately, people aren't looking at the economy. 30-year bond yields are the highest they've been in years. People went crazy when Liz Truss supposedly crashed the bond market, and they're even higher than that. So ultimately, Labour are crashing the economy, and the Conservatives need to wrangle back what is talked about in the media from immigration, from these protests, which Reform has the advantage on, having no record And they need to frame it back in terms of the economy, which has been the biggest issue historically. If they can do that, and if they can almost be sensible enough to level with the public, tell the public that the tax burden is the highest it's been since World War II, our national debt is over 100% of GDP, we can finally get back to conservative first principles, cutting tax, cutting away the size of the state, and getting back to a truly right-wing agenda.
Wow. I'm just trying to picture, every time I think of Javier Milei, I think of the wild hair. I think of the chainsaw. I think that was one of his more lasting images. And I just think, even in the U.S., where there are some people who very much agree with we've got to cut government to the bone, that would still be kind of a hard sell. Is it possible to present a more genteel kind of approach, but still have the same dedication and intensity that Milei has, in the case of what the conservatives need now?
Well, I think it is a hard sell, Brian. Ultimately, British politics is all about short-termism. Government's only in for 5 years. In America, that's only 4. And really, you don't have an awful lot of time at all to get through your policy platforms. So when they're promising things to the general public, they're talking in a very minute time span. Ultimately, we need to extend that. We need a long-term vision. And while it may not be easy to level with the public about the state of the economy, I really don't see that we have any other choice. As I've mentioned before, our national debt's so high, and we need to get that under control. Otherwise, what happens next? Do we have an IMF bailout, or does our economy go?
You make a good point in your article too that the public does like honesty, but politicians really seem averse to being honest. I guess if telling the truth means that people might have to face something unpleasant, do they worry that they're gonna want to kill the messenger, figuratively?
Well, I think a lot of politicians are scared of how the public will react when they talk about policies. But like I say, the British public has no choice other than accepting that we've had it too good for too long. The state has done too much, albeit on a very badly managed level. Personally, I've never had an annual budget surplus in my lifetime. The last time was 2001 over the spell of Tony Blair. So really, what's the solution? Can we tax people even further, make the tax burden even higher, which I suggest is the wrong way to do it, or can we cut the state? And ultimately, it's so badly managed. Personally, for me, it's a no-brainer.
But I guess this is a very loaded question. Do you see things in the same way that the average, Briton would see it, or perhaps because of your work, do you have a little bit deeper insights? It's the same problem I face in trying to convince people of certain policy deficiencies in the U.S. There are things that I see that are concerning, but for most people, they see a headline, scan it, and they move on. They haven't really dived deep like you have into the topic.
Well, I think that's a very interesting point to make, and certainly one that the Tories should look at in terms of a Department of Government efficiency, making sure that tax revenue is spent. Well, the state is managed almost like a business, so tax revenue is spent as efficiently as possible. Polling has suggested that the public is generally behind that. So I really don't think you'd have any trouble. You'd have no trouble at all convincing the public that this is the right thing to do. The problem is the sell of short-term pain, which the public aren't used to hearing from politicians. And I think although it's tough, Javier Milei managed it in Argentina. He managed to get elected. And quite frankly, the way the Reform Manifesto is at the moment, that is uncosted. There are no costings to do with that. Labour are managing the economy so badly and talking about even higher income taxes and wealth taxes, even taxes on renters' properties and stuff like that. So really, the Tories can frame themselves as the shrewd people of business and the people willing to run the country as such and make sure taxpayers get a better deal.
This reminds me of an old saying I heard long ago that said, well, we've tried everything else. Why don't we try telling the truth and see how that works? And I think that might actually fit here. Again, we are talking with Ted Newson. He is a Young Voices contributor. Ted, where can people follow you or find you on social media?
Thank you, Brian. I'm on Twitter at NewsonTed, and I post there pretty regularly, so you can find me there.
Welcome back. This is our fourth and final segment today on Moving Forward with Young Voices. Hey, happy to welcome Garion Frankel back to the program. You may well be one of the longest running alumni appearing on this show, but it's always good to see you. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. I know it's been about 5 years. Hard to believe.
Well, so for people who are meeting you for the first time, Gary, let's take a moment and have you tell them about who you are and what you do.
Absolutely. In a previous life, I was a political staffer, but now I'm a doctoral student in K-12 educational leadership at Texas A&M University. I write about things like school choice, American history, the founding fathers, and just all that cool stuff that never ceases being important.
And I spend a lot of time on Substack because there's a lot of great writing to be found there. And I'm loving this piece that you had written for Pivot by YV Substack, America 250, A Republic If You Can Teach It, Surveying the Past and Future of American Education. I'm excited for next year. I don't remember what you call it. I remember the bicentennial.
The semi-quincentennial.
There we go. Okay. So that one doesn't just roll off the tongues, but that's a huge milestone. And to understand how we got to the 250-year mark, you have to understand that an educated citizenry played a role in that from the very beginning to today. But that doesn't mean that we're necessarily, free and clear of any kind of effort to maintain the republic. Talk to me a little bit about this article and about how we teach American history.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the most important things that really comes alight when you look at what the founding fathers said about education, none of them ever really wrote a book that says, this is what we think about education in the way that somebody like John Locke would have. But it was very obvious that it was incredibly important to them. They were always writing about education, always thinking about education. They were handling the education of their own kids in many instances. And what you see across the political spectrum at that time period, Federalist, Anti-Federalist, something else, they all agreed on this point, which was that a healthy education, a classical education rooted in the liberal arts, rooted in moral education, was not just good for the American Republic, but it was necessary in order to have a republic to begin with. And this is really the theme of American education for, at least the first 100 years of our history, where the emphasis, no matter the system, no matter the ideas, no matter the philosophy, it's based on moral formation. It's based on creating good citizens, good people who can go out and be ready to defend and preserve the principles of the republic. And we've lost that a little bit over the past 150 years or so. You still see signs of it here or there. You still see a lot of allusions to it, but it's not the same. It's not what they envisioned.
I think a lot of people would be surprised to realize back in I believe it was the early 1950s, Mortimer Adler, and I forget who his cohort was there at the University of Chicago, but they compiled the great books of Western civilization, and we're talking 70, almost 80 years ago. They were concerned that we were losing touch with the schools of thought, the philosophy, the foundational canon of Western thought that came before us. And I don't think it has improved much in that time. Talk to me about the education of the people who founded this nation. I mean, we're not trying to build them up as supermen, but what kind of education did the founders enjoy?
Absolutely. Many of the founders, especially in the middle colonies as well as the South, were educated at home. In some cases, it might have been by their parents, but most often it would be through private tutors. And the curriculum was heavily centered around moral education and the liberal arts. They read a lot of the great Greek and Roman texts. They were reading Plato. They were reading Aristotle. They were reading Polybius. They were reading Cicero. And then in a more modern sense, they were reading Shakespeare. They were reading Don Quixote. They were reading Algernon Sidney. They were reading even just some of the typical fables and little tall tales that have wormed themselves into American history. But the thing unifying this entire curriculum was that it wasn't just about learning reading, and it wasn't just about learning to write, and it wasn't just about learning math, although those were definitely really important parts of it. And apprenticeships and learning a trade were an entirely different segment of education. That came later. What we're talking about here is the foundation. The foundation was about virtue. That was the purpose of education. It was meant to create individual virtue. And that's how most of the founding fathers learned. In New England, it was pretty much the same thing, though you had a bit more of a public school system and a bit more of an established university system up in that part of the country. But the founding principles of education and the core ideas that were being transmitted from one generation to the next were pretty similar across the country. They were all the founding fathers at the continental congresses were speaking from the same canon. And that was really important when it came to founding this country.
There's a word that goes along with virtue that I want to throw out there and just kind of get your reaction to it. I think of character. And maybe we can differentiate between private virtue versus public virtue, because both of those types played a huge role in the kind of individuals that set the stage for founding this nation.
Yeah, absolutely. And you even see this distinction as far back as Aristotle, because in the politics, he makes, in the Nicomachean Ethics, he makes a distinguishment between a good man and a good citizen. And while they had overlapping qualities, they were by no means the same thing. And it was very possible, if not expected, for a person to be a good man but not a good citizen, or vice versa. Of the founding fathers and the people who were educating them were very aware of this idea. But unlike Aristotle, who thought that they were mutually exclusive to a certain extent, the founding fathers were hoping to cultivate a citizenry of both good people and good citizens, because they were very influenced by Christianity. They were very influenced by later moral education. So to them, it wasn't possible to have a good government or a good society unless there was a virtuous citizenry that it could rest on as its bedrock. So to your point about character, it wasn't just about being a good citizen. It was about being the type of person who even has the capacity to be a good citizen.
And that's something that I think we have really lost touch with today. How many citizens do we know of? In fact, I'll put another word out there. How many voters do you know of who actually spend a fair amount of time really educating themselves about the issues versus those who, I better vote. They show up at the voting booth, wet their finger, I'm feeling this, and cast their vote based upon, what name they recognize or which one causes, feelings of fear. There's a huge difference.
Well, if you ever want to be pessimistic about the future, look at the Annenberg Public Policy Center's tests of various forms of civic knowledge. They run it every year, every 2 years. I forget exactly which, but it's frequent. It's pretty frequent, and the numbers are really sobering. One of my favorites is that about a quarter of American adults cannot name a single branch of government. Oof. Just after the pandemic, they found that a little over half could name all three. And that was the highest number that they had ever recorded. So there is a surprising number of voters, surprising to many people anyway, who know very little about this stuff.
Your article, by the way, does a marvelous job of tracking how education has evolved since the founding of the Republic. And we've got about 1 minute left. What do you see as we are moving forward? Tell me either the places that give you concern or the places where you're feeling hopeful.
Well, since I've been pessimistic this whole time, I'm going to be a little optimistic now. And I think I'm seeing a lot of interest in returning to an education that is once again concerned with virtue. You're seeing this in the school choice movement with microschooling. You're seeing this with the increase in homeschooling. Classical schools, which teach that old model very specifically, are exploding in popularity now. Of the most recent numbers I saw, more than 600,000 kids are attending one of those kinds of schools. So there's interest in this again. There's a recognition that we've strayed too far from the light and there's a problem. So I am hopeful, despite all the problems, that things will get better.
It is so good to catch up with you again, my friend. I look forward to your take on whatever topic we happen to be discussing. Again, talking with Garion Frankel. He is Young Voices Middle East History and Peace Fellow, and wears a lot of other hats as well. Where can people follow you on social media?
Absolutely. I'm most active on Twitter or X or whatever it's called now at FrankelGarion.
Very good. Looking forward to our next conversation.
Thanks for having me, Brian.